This lesson focuses on creating inclusive learning environments, focusing on the power of a name. By the end of this lesson, you will walk away with tips and strategies for remembering student names, as well as how to correctly pronounce student names. Inclusive learning environments create climates where all students are encouraged to participate. You can do this by learning about students' backgrounds and tailoring approaches accordingly, establishing ground rules for discussing controversial issues, and developing and helping students develop deeper racial and socioeconomic awareness. The first step in creating an inclusive learning environment is knowing a student by their name. Not only is knowing their name important, so is knowing how to pronounce their name correctly. Our names are an incredibly important part of our identity. They carry deep personal, cultural, familial, and historical connections. They also give us a sense of who we are, the communities in which we will belong, and our place in the world. Knowing and using students' names helps to establish a more comfortable, less formal atmosphere in class and shows an interest in your students as individuals. Here are a few tips that you can implement into your learning environments to help you learn your students' names. First is the use of name tents. Ask students to write their names in large letters on both sides of a folded index card or piece of paper, and to keep this card on their desk for the first few classes. A second tip or strategy is the use of a seating chart. Ask students to sit in the same place for a few classes to help you learn their names more quickly. Once you have your seating chart, study it until you remember students' names. The third tip is to learn a few names at a time. Use the time just before and after class to learn 5 to 10 names per class. Greet students as they enter the class or invite students to your office in small groups to learn a little about them in addition to their names. Both approaches reinforce that you are interested in the concerns of individual students. You can also assign several short assignments in the first week and then practice names as you personally return papers or assignments. The fourth tip or strategy is to ask students about themselves. Ask students to tell you something to make them and their names more memorable. For example, where they are from, what they like to read or do for fun, or their long-term goals. Even if this is not something you want to make public to your students, making notes about students' appearances and personality traits can be very helpful for remembering their names. Lastly, play get to know you games. Playing get to know you games and games where you have to remember the players' names will benefit both you and your students. The more you practice getting to say your student's name out loud, the easier time you will have remembering them. A growing number of educators believe equity and inclusion in the classroom begins with honoring and therefore correctly pronouncing students' names. Teachers will inevitably find some names hard to pronounce, especially on the first day of school. But repeated mispronunciations can be considered racial microaggressions, according to researchers. Whether you intend to or not, what you're communicating is your name is different, foreign, weird, and it's not worth my time to get it right. These are a few tips you can use in your classroom to help say students' names correctly. First is to repeat their name. A great tip is to repeat a name a couple of times until you get it right. If you're trying to pronounce someone else's name correctly, be respectful and kindly ask them how to correctly pronounce it. Then practice on your own. Double check with them by asking, am I saying your name correctly? A second tip is to annotate your roster. When you meet the class for the first time, Take a few extra seconds for each student to identify his or her most 1 to 2 outstanding physical features or other noticeable traits. Be sure to include ways of pronouncing names that are unfamiliar to you by breaking them apart into syllables on the roster. The third tip for pronouncing student names is to expand your horizons. Become familiar with common sounds and names from different cultures. This can happen naturally by purposefully consuming more diverse literature and media through diversifying the books and materials used in your own classrooms. Letters from different cultures make different sounds, and understanding these differences will help you as you learn new student names from diverse cultures and backgrounds. By utilizing the tips for learning students' names and pronouncing students' names, you are on the right track to ensuring that your classroom is one that is inclusive and understands the value and power of a name.